All of her contributions by far are incredible to our community. Heather's involvement in various facets of law enforcement, including overseeing the field training program, accreditation, emergency services unit, and crime analysis, underscores her multifaceted expertise and dedication to excellence. In 2008, Heather faced a harrowing domestic violence incident at the hands of her ex-husband. Instead of allowing it to define her, she transformed the trauma into a powerful force for change. Through speaking engagements and victim advocacy, Heather shares her journey as a survivor, igniting hope and empowering countless individuals to find their own strength in the face of adversity. Today, as we gather to honor Heather Glogolich, let us not only celebrate her professional achievements, but also recognize her spirit and drive, which make her makes her meaningful, impactful to other people in her life. Please join me in welcoming a true hero, dedicated leader, and unwavering advocate, Captain Heather Glogolich.
Thank you. I might take you traveling with me. That was fantastic. I'm sorry. I move a lot, so someone will yell at me at some point. Volume's good. We're good. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be a part of this. I get the opportunity to speak a lot in a lot of different venues and for a lot of different groups, but higher ed is really something that's a huge passion for me, especially here because of my connection with specifically Michael Iris. Him and I were in the same cohort together. We worked on our doctorates together. I was this little tiny silly cop, and I was surrounded by three incredible higher ed individuals who really just helped me finish. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't. And it's a little unheard of one for a female to be in law enforcement that gets promoted to a certain level, but it's much more rare to have a law enforcement officer that pushes the envelope as far as the formal education that we can receive. So it's been a really big honor. I don't ever walk around. I don't want anybody to call me doctor. It's just Heather. I don't even actually like my guys to call me captain because I just think it's a status and it's not who I am. So there's a couple of things that I'm going to talk about today, specifically resiliency, because I think that's one of my most favorite topics. And when I entered law enforcement in 2004, for me, I very much just wanted to fit the mold. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be one of the guys. I didn't really want to be recognized for being a female because I felt as though people might not think that I deserved the same opportunity to be there, because it's just kind of the mindset when you're in a paramilitary, very male dominated profession. And a lot of that was in my own head. That wasn't something that was presented to me or pushed towards me. And so I think just being who I was and no background in the military or law enforcement or first responders in any of my family, it was a step somewhere that was unknown. I didn't know the process. I very much was not prepared. I didn't understand that I at some point would allow the things that make me who I am to help me excel. And my why has changed. And I talk about my why a lot because I think it's so impactful to understand that. And it's such a buzz term right now, right? You have these great leaders out there talking about like, what's your why? And it can be very simplistic, but at the same time, it shouldn't be, and it should be changing at all points. When I became a police officer, very simple. I just wanted to help people. That's what I wanted to do. I'm super nosy too. I'm a Taurus. So I was like, I want to be a part of all of it. So I think that's where that came from. But my why has since changed. I'm going to talk a little bit about my story with my ex-husband once I get through a little bit of the beginning, and you'll understand where my passion for victim-focused policing comes from. It also is where my drive comes from. I very much had a choice, and everybody watching this and anybody that you come in contact with always has a choice. You can remain a victim or you can become a survivor. You can sit back and allow others to make decisions for you that might not be in your best interest, or you can take a step forward and make the decisions for yourself and create the life that you want. And as I talk about things like your why and how you move forward and the impact that you can potentially have, you have to understand that the foundation of everything that you do is who you surround yourself with. If you continue to surround yourself with people that don't help you be the very best version of yourself, you do not have a circle of friends. You have a cage of friends. And you can go, you really want me to use this? Keeps going in there. Okay, we're good. Okay. The same thing goes with for family. And I think that's almost the hardest because we feel so bound to that obligation by blood that we don't realize that sometimes those are the most toxic people in our lives. And it took me a really long time. I'm 43, about to be 44. I've been married twice, divorced. I have 4 kids. I am the commanding captain for a major police department in a very, very busy city. And I have been told no more times than I've been told yes. And I just keep working until I turn those no's into yeses. And that's kind of where my perseverance comes from. My why now is very much about empowering the next generation of law enforcement leaders and law enforcement professionals to step up and be resilient and viewed as humans, because that's what we are, to let go of that mindset that we have to be perfect and to feel as though that we're not allowed to fail. I've taught my kids, and my husband has the same mindset, that there is no such thing as failure. You either succeed or you learn. And if you don't do either of those, then maybe you fail, but we don't really accept that. Like, yesterday was March 5th. And for anybody who actually knows me, I'm very obsessed with the artist Pitbull. So this is pretty relevant, but he likes to say all the time, and the word can't is the word can, and the word don't is the word do, and the word won't is the word one. And in the word impossible is possible. And you think people aren't watching and that you're not impactful, especially to your kids, because, you know, sometimes you think one thing goes out the other. But my youngest the other day, actually like a month ago, she goes, "I love you." And I'm like, "I love you too." I was like, "I love you more." And she goes, "No, you don't. I love you more." I'm like, "Well, that's impossible." She goes, "Mom, and the word impossible is possible. And if you flip it, it's I'm possible." I'm like, "Okay." So I've created a monster. But I have worked really hard to become the person that I am. And I think that, especially the generation that's coming through, I'm seeing that they're having a really hard time being adaptable. I don't think you can ever be mentally prepared for a career. I actually really don't think you can absolutely be mentally or physically or emotionally as prepared as you could rise to when it comes to what you have to do for the rest of your life. And there's so much pressure on college students. I mean, I'm going through it now. My oldest is 17. She is looking at colleges and trying to figure out what she wants to do. She's very steadfast. She knows what she wants, but I want her to understand that that can change. And you don't just have to stick with one path if you're led down another one, and to be open to that and adaptable. So the best way to be prepared for your life is to be adaptable and to be resilient, and to understand that even though there are things that happen to us that are bad, that who you become in the process is because of both the good and the bad, and to accept it and to love on it. I think that, especially when it comes to the generation of my children, they tend to think it's the end of the world when something bad happens. And I, as a resilient mom, I try to show them who I am. When I have a bad day at work, they know about it. When I have to deal with things that are probably more sensitive in nature, I will talk to them on a level of what their age is. And so they understand. When I'm having a bad day, I'll cry in front of them. I'll put mommy in a timeout if I need to, because I don't want them to look at me like, "Oh, she can handle everything. She's not affected by this. She always is winning. She only shows me her successes." Like, I don't want my kids to see the Instagram story. I want them to see that you're going to have bad days and you'll make it through. Just go to bed, wake up the next day, and figure out a way to get through it. A lot of that came from my perseverance through my professional life and my perseverance through my personal life. And if you're not doing what you're passionate about, then you're not going to have them overlap. But for me, being a police officer very much was a definition of who I was. And you change when you become a police officer. You know, my relationships with my family changed. My parents didn't necessarily feel that they could trust me with the fact that my brother was a drug addict, because they were worried that I would act like a cop instead of a sister. And we had to make the decision to not see my parents for a while as they enabled my brother, which meant that I ended up being a single parent raising 2 kids after my divorce alone with no help. So in 2004, I got hired by the Morris County Sheriff's Office. I went through the police academy. I blew out my knee halfway through, and I was like, I know if I quit, I will never come back. So talk about an ego. You know, I was an athlete growing up, so I always would, like, I wanted to be number one, right? That was who my personality was. And it's since changed to be number one for me. Like, I do my best instead of being the best, which I think is huge to differentiate between. And when I got injured, I also started dating an academy mate who's a West Orange police officer. I was with the sheriff's office, and it was a whirlwind romance. I was like, here's my dream job at 23 years old. What's the next step? Get married and have kids, right? That seems crazy right about now, but we're talking 20 years ago now. It was a little bit more, I guess, normal to when you became a police officer that young, that was your next step. And so the relationship went really quickly. we went and were engaged pretty fast and got married. So we graduated the police academy in June of 2004 and got married in March of 2006. And I was on my honeymoon with him the first time he actually showed any forward signs of abuse. And I'll be honest, when I tell you, I look back now and I see all the warning signs and the flags, but he played it off so well. Like if I didn't answer my phone, and we're talking about like 2004 was prepaid minutes. We didn't have like cell phones that are unlimited. So you don't always pick up or send text messages, but he would show up at headquarters with flowers and be like, oh, I just missed you. But underneath it, it was very controlling. He didn't trust where I was and who I was with and what I was doing. And as the only female in an agency when I transferred, he really just did not trust anybody. So there were little controlling behaviors that came with that. And I never experienced that growing up. My parents rarely ever fought. It was a very, very warm and wonderful childhood growing up. And so I didn't really understand what domestic violence was until I was in the thick of it. And then by then, again, that ego steps in. I was like, how could I let this happen to me? You know, I'm a cop. I should know better. Nobody's going to believe me. He was officer of the year. And we were on our honeymoon and it was all inclusive. So we had been drinking in a bar that one night before we went back to our room. And we had met this couple and they were from New York and we were in the Dominican Republic. And the guy looks at my ex-husband and was like, listen, he's like, she's great. Good luck. Awesome. She's beautiful. She's so sweet. Like, you know, good luck with your marriage. And he just like, his face changed. And as we're walking back to the room, I'm like, what's your problem? Right. And I mean, because that's what I wanted to know. And at that point, he took me by the throat and he threw me against the wall and he started to choke me. And he's like, I could kill you down here and nobody will find you. And I was like, I can't believe this is happening on my honeymoon and all these things. You know, an employee walks by and he lets go and we go back to the room and he passes out. And I laid there and then finally passed out and went to sleep. And when I woke up the next morning, he acted as if nothing was wrong. And I was like, man, did that really just happen? Was I so drunk that like I made this up in my head? Was that a nightmare? And that's where the gaslighting started. That's where all these things that I should have known better about, I questioned. I started to question myself. I started to not have belief in who I was. I felt like I had no way out. I didn't have relationships with the people at work. And so I had no support system. My brother was going through it. And so again, like I didn't feel like I could tell my parents either. And I didn't know if they would understand. And then I got pregnant pretty quickly, realized that once I was pregnant, I was basically a walking sign of ownership. So there really wasn't any abuse physically then. I got pregnant pretty quickly after our first one. They're only 12 months apart, my older two. And in October of 2008, he came home and he was really highly intoxicated. He came from work and we worked opposite shifts. And when he walked in the house, he walked in the room and he's like, you know what, I'm done. And at that point I was done too, because if anybody knows anybody that's an alcoholic, you get two versions. You get the sober version and you get the drunk version. And it was exhausting to not know who I would have to deal with on a daily basis and what his mindset would be and whether or not I was safe emotionally and mentally and even physically. And we weren't really seeing each other and we were struggling because we bought a house and all the things. So I said, I'm done too. And that was the wrong answer. And for 4 hours, he beat me. And when I say he beat me, I mean, he strangled me twice until I, passed out and I urinated myself and he headbutted me. He bit my face. He took his belt off and beat my legs saying it's October. So if I let you live, nobody's going to have to see it because you can wear pants. And the whole time my 20-month-old and my 8-month-old were in the other room. And he said that if I made a noise and I woke them up, that he would kill them and me too. So for 4 hours, I endured this in silence. And the whole time, I've had a lot of time to reflect on it and work with a therapist to understand the things that I did really well to survive instead of focusing so much on the things that I did wrong to allow it to happen, right? That's very much a mindset shift. And, he at one point had me call out of work. So I called out of work thinking, great, I just gave him 3 days to bury my body if he wanted to. And then he tried to make me call my father, which I wouldn't do. My father's my best friend. If he had showed up, then it really would have been either my dad had called the cops and he would have been killed by suicide by officer, or, there would have been something worse. So it ended with him actually taking his gun out of his waistband and holding it to my head. And he started to pull the trigger. And at that point, I actually thought I was dead, right? I thought he had done it. I remember saying out loud, and he confirmed it later, that I said, that didn't hurt, which is insane, right? And a couple minutes later, he was crying and then he was asleep. And I laid there for hours just hoping that he wouldn't wake back up and still be drunk, thinking about how did I let this happen? How am I going to get out of this? Who have I become? Am I going to be able to leave? Am I strong enough? Is anyone ever going to believe me? Because I should know better. And I've never told anybody about this. And here I am. And here are my kids. And how do I raise two kids on my own? All these things are going through my head, but not once did I ever think about myself in that situation, but everybody else ahead of me and what they would think about me and how embarrassed I would be and how my guys would look at me at work. We woke up the next morning, you know, he was a little bit more sober. I don't think he really understood the gravity of what he had happened. And I just started a safety plan. He ended up going to the grocery store. I called the police and they placed him in custody at the grocery store. And that was the beginning of my transformation as a person. And I work in a profession where we are supposed to handle our stuff, right? We go from one call to the next. We don't have a whole lot of time to process it. At that point, if I had said that I was having trouble mentally with what I had gone through, I probably would have been sent to a psych exam and risked losing my job. And that's the realities of what law enforcement is, was actually, let me correct that. That isn't law enforcement anymore. We've, especially in New Jersey, we really pushed more towards a resiliency and mental health focused career, which is really nice to see because you travel to states like Indiana and their health insurance doesn't even cover mental health for officers to see a therapist if they need to. It was really hard. The justice system failed me. And that's hard to say for somebody who took an oath to hold the justice system and be very victim focused and make sure that the victims of all crimes get the best process ever. But for any of you that study criminal justice or know anything about it, you know, the Fourth Amendment, arrest, search, and seizure, and the US Constitution, and really due process and case law is very much focused on being able to protect the rights of people who commit crimes. And very rare, it doesn't take into consideration the rights of victims. So you have a public defender when you commit a crime, but we don't afford victims the same right to have free attorney representation when they show up. They'll have victim advocates, but they won't get great attorneys to stand in court with them as they go through a restraining order, or they deal with the fact that victims relive what happened to them over and over, while defendants still feel justified in what they did. And there were things about going through that as a police officer that I did not know how to handle, and either did my agency. I worked with all men, and they were scared to talk to me about it. They didn't know what to do. They were mad at themselves that they didn't see the signs. And it was a lot of back and forth on where to go and what to do and how to treat me, because they didn't want to re-victimize me by sending me to certain places for mental assistance and those things and making me couldn't do my job. But at the same time, they kind of let me down because they didn't put things in place that could have been. I started seeing my own therapist, and mental health is really important for me. And for those of you who don't see a therapist, I think everybody should have one legitimately, like just like, you know, you might have, I don't know, like everybody should have a therapist. But here's what I have to say, and here's my advice. If you don't see one yet, it's like dating. You're not going to marry the first person you go on a first date with, right? Shop around a little bit, make them work for you. Wait until you have that connection with somebody. Because the first therapist I saw asked me what happened in my childhood to allow me to let that happen. I was like, peace out. Therapy's not for me. I left. And we talk very much about PTSD in law enforcement. And I'm a big believer that PTSD is not a disorder until it becomes one. I think it's an injury. Just like when I blew out my knee, I had to rehab it. And I think trauma is the same way. And as first responders, the people in this room, you guys might endure some other people's traumas depending on what you're doing, whether you're a guidance counselor or, you know, maybe you're dealing with things at home, but law enforcement, you know, EMTs, medics, even doctors, we deal with almost 1,300 is the stat, 13 to 1,400 traumatic incidents over our 20-year career, when most people deal with it 2 or 3 times in their lifetime. And so for us, we walk around with what I like to consider a backpack, right? So you decide to be a first responder, someone who wants to be a servant leader in a community and help other people make decisions and help save people's lives and do these things that make a positive or sometimes a negative impact. We give you a backpack when you sign up. And every time you experience someone else's trauma or workplace harassment or feeling discriminated against or anything negative that has to do with our job, whether it's the things that we deal with and we make decisions on, the calls that we go to, the people that say things to our face that just we wouldn't be allowed to say back that are just horrific. Being in motor vehicle crashes, just constantly being on camera, and then trying to balance having a social life and a family with also being a dedicated public. And, we take those and they're little rocks and we put them in our backpack. And it depends on what it is the different size. And as you don't talk about those things, or you don't give credence to those rocks that are going in there, even if they aren't your own, your backpack really starts to get heavy. And then you get to the point where you can't carry it anymore. And that's what leads to a lot of officer suicide. And actually the leading cause of death for women in the line of duty is actual suicide. So for me, it's important. And after what I went through with my ex-husband, you want me to switch? Testing, we're good. After I went through what I went through with my ex-husband, I did realize very early on that I didn't want to allow him to have the opportunity to do it to anyone else again. And I realized that I was in a unique position as a law enforcement officer that was comfortable talking about what I went through after I got through the mindset of everybody's going to judge me and all of these things. And I was like, you know what? And I turned around and I took that pain that I dealt with and I turned it into a purpose. And I realized that regardless of what I had been through, it didn't define me, but it could help me define what I wanted to do with my life and how I could potentially impact people. And I learned it when I investigated a domestic violence case with a woman who came in. She needed medical attention, but she would not tell us what happened. And it was very obvious to me that it was the person that she was in a relationship with. She was, her face was broken and she tried to say she fell. I used that same excuse one time. So I was like, listen, I was like, you can trust us. She's like, you're never going to understand what I'm going through. You're like this strong female cop. And I was like, girl, have a seat. We're going to have a talk. And that was the first time I told a victim of any crime my story and what I had been through. And she, at that point, turned to me and started crying and said, thank you. And she told us everything that happened. And we were able to put that man away for actually 35 years, which was fantastic. So again, that's the impact that I was able to have. And my agency wasn't exactly supportive of what happened. When I tell you the justice system failed me, the family court system, not my favorite. My ex-husband was facing 75 years in prison for what he did to me. He was charged with kidnapping, 2 counts of aggravated assault with a weapon, gun and a knife. He was, and then on top of it, criminal restraint, terroristic threats. And when he went to grand jury, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically like a small group of people that get together that decide whether or not the charges that were brought against a defendant that are aggravated deserve to go to trial, or whether or not there's not enough there. That's the easiest way for me to put it. And he decided to testify on his own, to which he lied. And so they charged him with perjury as well. He was facing 75 years in prison. And because I had never reported it before, because he was under the influence of alcohol, because he had passed a psychological exam to become a police officer, and because he was Officer of the Year, they offered him a plea deal of 6 months, to which he did 2 months and 1 week, and showed up at my house and asked to see my children, to which I answered the door with my gun pointed in his face. And I never left anywhere without it. I slept every night with my kids in my bed with my gun under my pillow, worried he was going to show up drunk. And there was nothing I could do. And I felt helpless. And as someone who's a sworn officer, I'm held to a higher standard. So if I showed up for custody exchange and the family court allowed him to keep 50-50 custody with me, because they said they couldn't hold him accountable in regards to his relationship with our children because of what he did to me, because there was no proof he did it to them. We would custody exchange and I would have my gun on my hip and he would say he felt threatened, and there would be an internal affairs investigation, and then it would prevent me from getting promoted. And there were all these things that just kept happening, where that he used the system to continually abuse me. And I was limited on what I could do as a police officer because of how it was. And I was just angry. I was angry at everybody. I was angry at myself. I was angry, that I had to raise 2 kids on my own. I was angry at him. And I had to learn to co-parent with this monster and trust that I was raising my children in a way that they would understand someday that they had a choice. And that's why I kind of led with, the people you surround yourself, regardless of it's your friends, people that you work with, your family. If you don't choose people that help you be the very best version of yourself, you do not have a circle, you have a cage, and you're stuck. And you're the only one that has the ability to use a key to get out of it and empower yourself to live the life that you want. And I told my kids from a young age, especially my older 2, I said, listen, if I don't serve you, if I don't help you live the life that you want, I give you permission to let me go. And that was my way of teaching them that they could let go of my ex-husband once if he continued to be a monster to them. That happened during COVID. My daughter got COVID, my oldest, and she ended up getting my ex-husband sick. And he has asthma. So he called her and said, if I die, I want you to know it's your fault. And she came downstairs and she's like, I don't really want to go there anymore. And I was like, that's fine. You don't have to. State of New Jersey, you don't have to be a certain age. If you can articulate why, you don't have to go. And my son stayed, and he idolized his father because his father treated him like he was on a pedestal. And he used him as a pawn in manipulation. It was really hard being me to get through that. And again, I say me, and it's pretty rare that I actually focus on who I am. But with this evolution of mindset, especially when it comes to work or even with my family, and if any of my kids were here, they would tell you, I very much believe that the glass is not half empty or half full. It's refillable. It's your choice. But at the end of the day, I am the most important person in my life. And that's hard to say when you're a mom, because there's that mommy guilt, but I am, because if my cup is empty, I can't fill up theirs. So I have to take that time for me. And that's with everything. And it's why I push to be the best version of myself. My ex-husband ended up beating my son about 2 years ago, to the point where he had a concussion, broken ribs, bruised ribs, restraint marks on his wrists. And I ended up being able to put him back in jail. He was released. And then he ended up trying to kill another woman, and he went to jail and ultimately committed suicide in prison. And when it comes to a mindset and what you want to do, I had to work very hard at letting go of the anger towards him, because it doesn't serve him anymore. He's dead. It eats at me, right? So if I hold on to that anger towards that person who did all these things to me, I'm really only hurting myself. And trying to balance the way my daughter feels versus how my son feels, and how I feel about a monster being dead. I've changed my mindset to thank him. I very much love my ex-husband for the gifts that he gave me. I actually really love who I've been able to become. And that's because of him also, even though it was a horrific situation. I thank him for that, which is odd. I wouldn't want to go through it again ever, but I'm glad that I did, because here I am. And the impact that I have on victims, on people, on women, on men, is nothing that I would have been able to do without that experience. And when you evolve that back into like what you want to do as far as your job and the passion, and whether or not you're really ever going to be prepared for it, you're not. You just have to be adaptable, and you have to have a growth mindset. I very much am able to be around and supported by people that help lift me up, help me continue to have a voice, help me empower people to make choices for themselves that are healthy, and let them live in a way that is just really genuine. I do believe that because of what I went through, I've made a positive impact on law enforcement, especially the men that I work alongside, because when they see someone come in that they can't relate to, that might be a victim of a crime, they think about me. And they would think about how, if that can happen to Heather, it can happen to anybody. And how would I want somebody to talk to her? How would I want somebody to talk to, my son or my daughter, or all these things? And it's been great to be able to turn something so tragic into something that can be so impactful. We all have things that we deal with. And for me, I'll usually, people come up to me and be like, I had some of that happen to me. It wasn't as bad as you. And I have to stop them and be like, my story is my story. Like, your bad is your bad. And that's what we try to teach cops, to be servant leaders, because people are calling us on their worst day. And it takes a lot to pick up the phone and call a cop for help. It just does. And we have to lead with grace and patience, and understand that, yeah, that neighbor calling about their barking dog, like, they called us because they had enough of it. It might be the least important thing. We might have just come from, a baby that we brought back to life, or a fatal motor vehicle crash, and think that this is absolutely the most ridiculous call that we're on. But we have to understand that people are calling us. And that's what servant leadership is on every level. It's being asked to do something to help someone else, whether it's make a decision, make their day better. And I try to lead my people with grace and patience in a way that, no matter who I interact with, I want them to walk away and be like, listen, maybe I had a really bad interaction with that cop, but thank you, because you weren't that cop. Like, you changed my perception of what law enforcement is. You spent extra time with me. You really didn't make me feel like, because I made a bad choice, I'm a bad person. And there are bad people out there. I've met them. I've arrested them. I've had them try to hurt me. And at the end of the day, like, if I'm able to gain control and be there, like, I still want to try to make a positive impact in somebody's life to make better decisions in the future. It's the most incredible gift that I could have ever had. So, I very much know that you are asking me to tell my story so people could understand the resiliency aspect of what I do and where I come from, and to be an ear. But as you move forward, or even people in the room that are like in their career, and sometimes you feel stuck, or sometimes you don't feel that you're where you want to be, it's up to you to change the scenery. Like, you can stay. It might be like, hey, I'm here because I can't do this and I can't do this. You can. You just have to choose your hard. Is your hard staying where you're at and not being happy? Or is your hard taking a step and taking a chance in order to be happy? Because we are not guaranteed tomorrow. I'm not even guaranteed the next 5 minutes. And going through what I've been through, and that's how we live our lives in my family. Not always easy for my kids. They're a lot more mature than anybody else in their grade. They know that mom and dad might not come home. They know that we don't argue before we leave. Like, I hate the mornings where I'm screaming at my kids to get ready for school because I'm so frustrated. And then they go to get out of the car and they're like a little bit teary eyed. And then I jump back out. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I love you. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, God forbid there's a school shooting here and I might not see them later. Or I'm involved in something in Newark where I'm in a shooting. And I'm like, those are the thoughts that go through my mind on a daily basis as a law enforcement officer. But those of you that are in the criminology or want to be a cop or do something where you're, serving others, even teachers, it's not exactly nothing is safe anymore sometimes. Value what's in your life now. Focus on the positive. It's very easy to be negative, but to turn it around and have that positivity focused mindset is really important. And don't ever let anybody tell you no. I worked with all men. I fought really hard to be promoted. I ended up having to sue my past agency for pregnancy discrimination in order to get promoted. And when I did that, I felt like people were going to look at me like I didn't earn it. Like I ended up having to sue to get it, right? I cared more about what other people thought than what I knew was fact. And I wasn't a very great leader at all as a sergeant. I transitioned into a lieutenant and I really found my pace. And I ended up sticking up for my squad in something with a really significant incident. And I ended up having to go through an internal affairs process, and I ended up getting suspended. But I did the right thing that I should have, and everybody was safe. I just didn't do what some of the admin had wanted at the time. And it was the right thing to do. And sometimes that's a really hard decision. If it was easy, everybody would make the decision, right? But it prevented me from being a captain. And I knew that I was either going to leave law enforcement or I would find a way to get myself to where I wanted to be. And I wanted to be a leader. And so I ended up giving a presentation on my story, and the chief of police of NJIT sought me out. And honestly, because of my higher ed doctorate, they looked at me even a little bit more seriously to bring me in, and I transferred in. And it's the first time it's ever been done in New Jersey. I transferred out of one agency as lieutenant and went in as a captain. I got a raise. My kids get to go to college for free. And I will probably be chief of police in 3.5 years. And so I don't let people tell me no. I either do it and ask for forgiveness, because sometimes that's easier than permission, or I find a way to make it done if it's what I want. And most people look at me and they're like, do you sleep? I tell everybody that God gave me 28 hours a day and all of you only got 24. That's how I make it work. But I don't let anybody tell me no. At 42 years old, I started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I just competed in this is not from a husband. This is from Jiu-Jitsu. That is why my face looks like that. Doesn't always happen. I went back to playing softball. When I was married to my husband, I had my associates. I went back, I got my bachelor's while I was pregnant. I graduated 8 months pregnant with my third. I went for 2 master's degrees. And then I continued on to get my doctorate because I had a plan. In my line of work, I'm not guaranteed to have a job. It's like a divorce, and I don't ever get to choose. I might get to choose, but I might not. I might have a really bad car accident where I can't continue my job, or be involved in something where I can't continue to be a cop, but it's not always my decision. So I want a plan B. My plan B was to get my degree and be able to work in higher ed so I could, allow my children to have a great future without student loans. I said, because we don't know how much is horrible, but so right now I'm going to open it up. I thank you for your attention and your time. I know my story is not always easy to listen to. It's actually, I kind of feel like a fraud up here 15, almost 16 years later. I'm just not that person anymore from 2008. So when I tell this story, I almost feel like I'm telling someone else's story. I'm not that mindset. I'm not that person. I'm not weak-minded or weak-hearted. But when I talk about my kids, I kind of get a little bit more emotional about it because it is definitely more recent. But with that, if anybody here suffers from domestic violence or has been a victim and this is triggering, please reach out to somebody. You don't have to go through it alone. Again, I think PTSD is an injury which can turn into a disorder unless we don't pay attention to it. And asking for help does not make you weak. I actually think it makes you stronger. So thank you. And I think there may be questions. Normally people are like, I don't want to ask that question because she just talked about that, but I'm legitimately an open book. You can ask anything.
It's either going to be questions or we're going to do a duet. So it's up to you.
And all right, it's salt and pepper because I only rap. All right.
Any questions from the audience? Thank you so much for.
Welcome. Thank you.
I'm at a complete loss for words, and I think everybody else is as well. We have one question over here.
I was wondering, how many times have you had to share your story with a survivor? And how often does that play out?
So that's a great question because, statistic is that 1 in 3 women report being a victim of domestic violence or a victim of sexual assault, specifically college-age students, when we start to develop, our relationships and things like that. So that's a great question because I have absolutely just told my story to a survivor in here or a victim. There's someone in here that is either dealing with it or has. So I can't answer that question because so unfortunately, as a police officer and even a victim, you're not allowed to talk about what happens unless there's formal charges and the person is convicted. Otherwise, you can be civilly sued for, a bunch of stuff, hearsay, all the things, right? Defamation of character. Luckily, my husband went to jail and I just wasn't going to let him make me shut up anymore. And so I've been probably telling this story since 2011 or 12. I'm lucky enough to travel the country and teach a course for women in law enforcement to really hold themselves accountable to breaking the stigma of women in policing and find their niche and understand that their self-identity is much more important than trying to fit a mold of who they think they should be. So I always tell that, and it's still insane to me the amount of cops that come up to me and they're like, that happened to me. And once I told it the first time to a group of cops, and I realized that, wow, out of 500 female police officers in this room, the statistics are that 133 have experienced it in some way. I felt stupid because I thought I was special, right? I thought that I was like stupid, and then I let it happen to me. But you find that the purpose of why people do things, their why comes from those experiences. And it's not an easy thing to deal with. And it's even worse when you're a man and you're in law enforcement dealing with that, because you have to worry about your significant other making something up and you looking like the bigger, stronger man. Like, how could he let that happen? And so I've been able to really impact men in law enforcement to come forward and feel comfortable saying that they're victims of domestic violence as well, which is awesome. So you asked that question, and every time I tell my story, it's to a survivor or a victim. That's a good question.
Any other questions? We have another question over here.
Hi. From your experiences, have you been able to apply it specifically to the NJIT campus and helping students there?
Really great question. So I only just got hired September 1st. I'm like a brand new rookie that's 20 years on the job. But I have. So what's great is that I'm also the LGBTQ plus law enforcement liaison, which they've never had there. We have over 124 law enforcement LGBTQ liaisons throughout the state of New Jersey. I am one of 4 allies, but the rest are all openly out LGBTQ plus. And they didn't have that there. And we have a very large community here that does that. And actually, that's one of the greatest underreported victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, the LGBTQ plus community, because look who they're going towards, right? We're going towards predominantly white men who are heterosexual. And so there's that disconnect, not because the men that I work with aren't able to relate, but there's a disconnect, and you want people to mimic who you are. And that's why diversity and inclusion and equity are so important in our job and everywhere. So there's relatability factor. But I've been able to do a symposium. I now work with human resources for the onboarding of new hires, and I do a whole block on workplace harassment and sexual assault and domestic violence and how to report that and what the obligations are under Title IX and Clery and all that. And then I also work directly with the fraternities and the sororities to make sure they know that they have a partner. So if something does happen, they understand what calling 911 gives them the benefit of as far as protection. Or if somebody walks in and they're drunk and they just run them away, and they don't want that responsibility of having someone intoxicated, but they get hit by a car, where were they last? Like, that's your liability. So I've really been able to take my municipal police department experience and my experience as a survivor, and hopefully my empathetic servant leader approach to policing, and just being a good freaking human, and really just bring it in. And what's really great is as of August, we had 2 female police officers. Since I got hired in September, we now have 11. So we are dedicated to the 30 by 30 pledge, which is having 30% of female workforce be women, qualified women. I have to say that I'm probably the hardest on women because I don't want to see standards dropped for physical ability. Like criminals aren't going to discriminate against you, whether you're a male or a female, you're small or you're strong or you're not. And so I want quality women because there's nothing worse to great cops than a bad cop. And that goes every way. So I've been able to do a lot, which has been really nice.
Any other questions? I have a quick question and I'm gonna do my best to ask it. So you had said a couple of times you felt that the justice system had failed you and law enforcement had failed you. So what kind of brought you back? What was, what keeps you in the into what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about quitting a lot, like a whole lot. I don't really necessarily think that law enforcement failed me. And that's why I value being a first responder because we are the biggest advocates for victims. Court system is just so inundated with the things that they're dealing with. They don't have the time to devote to victims. And so I started utilizing a victim focused approach instead of just a defendant focused approach, right? I make sure that my team understands, use of force and case law that has to do with protecting people's rights, like Miranda and things like that. But I very much think that the criminal justice system is a justice system for criminals. And so by hitting it at level 1 and working with the recruits in the academy and field training officers at bare bones and saying, listen, like you have to understand that it could be somebody's worst day and you don't know what the backstory is, and developing a humanistic approach to how we police. We don't even use the word community policing in our agency. We call it community engagement. We shouldn't be policing our community. We should be policing the area. We should be engaging with our community no matter what that is. And I believe that it starts on every level, every car stop, every time I get out for a cup of coffee, every time someone walks in for a police report. And so I fight all the time. I worked to try and get juveniles held accountable for domestic violence offenses. Still working on that one. COVID was actually the best thing that could have happened to victims because in the state of New Jersey, if you go for a restraining order, within 10 days, you're required to go back to court for that restraining order, to sit in the same room with the person that committed the offenses against you. And when COVID happened, they at least moved it to an online basis, like a Zoom, which protects victims. So there's things that we're doing, trying to hold people accountable. I'm not very quiet. I don't really let people tell me to be quiet. And any room I'm in, I'll be like, respectfully, you're wrong. And if I feel they are, and I don't have a problem saying that. And I give myself, like every single time I tell this story, like I will go to sleep tonight and I will have a nightmare. I know that. I have my therapist on speed dial. It's cool. It's fine. I re-victimize myself every time I go through this. And some people think that it's like a good form of therapy and getting through it. It's, it's not. I give this part of myself to others so they can understand what I've been through, understand that other people go through it, for people to see like, hey, look where she is and the choices that she made. And while that wasn't a choice to go through it, how I responded to it was. And I do the same thing for my cops. And it doesn't have to just be this. It could be anything. Like you're involved in a shooting or you have like, a CPR call where somebody doesn't live or you don't handle a call well. It's okay to fail as long as we fail forward and we learn something from it. Like that's not a real failure. So that's kind of how I've empowered myself to stay.
All right, we have our first question from the virtual audience. This question states, how hard was it to be promoted from sergeant to detective? What were your challenges?
So it actually goes sergeant to lieutenant, but I think that's what they're asking. So to go from being a patrol officer to sergeant, it was hard. Like there's a lot of work that goes into it. And I work in what's called the Chief's Town, or I still do, but I worked in a Chief's Town. So everything is very much, you do a test, an oral, and then you do a written, and depending on where you come out, and then they do a command review. And how they assess your command review is really, it can come down to who they want instead of who deserves it sometimes. Which can be good, can be bad. But basically it was held against me that I had 2 babies in 18 months and that I had excessive use of sick time. And so they dropped me from second in the place to get promoted down to 6th. And they promoted 3 people before me. I had to sue and then I got it back, or I was able to get in there. But it's not necessarily easy. It's put in a lot of time, a lot of studying. I actually was I think I was studying for captain, right? When we were going through our PhD program or a doctorate program. So I was doing that on top of that. It's a choice, right? And it's sacrifice. But you know, it just depends on where you work and whether or not you're book smart or whether or not you're street smart and what's valued at your agency and whether or not you actually want to be a leader in an agency, because heavy wears the crown. The more responsibility, the more responsibility. Hope that answered that question.
Another question, want to know, what is your daily practices for resilience?
Oh, that's a great question. I do murder yoga in the morning. No, that's jujitsu. That's what I call it. So I wake up every morning at 3:45 and I drive a half an hour to Lyndhurst and I do jujitsu every single morning from 5 to 6, because for that hour, I don't think about anything else other than jujitsu. So I get everything else out of my mind. It's like clarity for me. I come home and I take care of my kids and then I go to work. And at night, what I practice with my daughter is we have a gratitude journal. And so we talk about the things that we were grateful for that happened. We try to find one thing during the day that we're grateful for that was positive. And then we set intentions for the next day. Even it's super small. Like if I know my day is crazy and I have forgotten to call my mom in a long time, I'll set a reminder and be like, my intention tomorrow is to make sure I call my mother. And I feel accomplished. Like I find little ways to feel accomplished. And one thing that has been really hard, but is part of my resiliency is learning boundaries and learning to say no. I'm not very good at it. I'm getting better at it, but not feeling guilty about self-preservation has been something I really work hard on. And I read a lot of books, a lot of books.
One more question. How difficult was it to trust men again?
Oh my God, I love that question. I absolutely love, I don't know who said it. Thank you. I love that question. So I am remarried. My husband and I just celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. We have 2 little kids. You'll hear me. It's the older 2 and then the reds. They're little redheads. They're crazy little leprechauns. But it wasn't hard. I grew up in a very loving family and I really had to realize that I am not my ex-husband. So if I can do it, there's other people that can, and I can't hold other people accountable for other people's actions. And so it was really easy. I set major boundaries in the beginning though. I was like, we will never argue with each other. Like we'll disagree. You're never going to yell at me. Like you're never going to call me names. We're like, there's just no need for it. I don't see a need to fight anyway. Like even when I'm dealing with somebody screaming it with me on the street, I'll just sit there and I'll be like, do you feel better now? Because I'm not going to yell back at you. Right. Like, and that's how I handle things. I just don't think it's necessary. But yeah, boundaries were really important, and choosing the right person, making him work. Like I did. I was like, you're putting in the work before I say yes. So prove yourself to me and my kids. Right. And that was important.
That was the last question for the virtual audience.
Thanks.
Any other questions in the room?
I have a question. I have a feeling it applies to students, staff, faculty that are in the room. You were a student, full-time worker, a parent. What do you suggest for time management? How do you be successful and how
Time management is, I think I really excel at that. So thank you. Everything is scheduled. I mean, everything, which can be a lot, like, especially once you get like a second phone from work and then you different calendars. But my husband and I share a calendar with our older 2. So like, if my daughter's like, oh, they asked me to pick up a shift at work, I'll be like, put it in the calendar. Otherwise it's not there. Right. So even if I'm like, I have therapy from this to this time, it's in my calendar. And by sharing that, we're able to do it. I will schedule, bedtime with the kids. Like I'll put it in my calendar, I share it with my chief. Like, don't call me, I'm not picking up. Right. Like I have to schedule things to the umpteenth, and I prioritize things mostly for my mental health purposes. Like I have to go and do things for me. Like I have to go to the gym. I can't feel guilty about it. But we often, as I think moms, and I can't speak on behalf of dads, but I'm sure it's the same. I was just like, we always come last. Like that's how I was brought up. Like we eat last, food goes on the table, everybody else eats. Like, oh, maybe I'll shower today if I get to it. Right. Like that's very much how I was taught to parent. And so for me, time management really came down to prioritizing myself so I could prioritize them and being honest with them about not being able to give myself that time. And it, I have dream boards with my kids. So when I am away and they're like mad at me and they're missing me, they can realize what mommy's working for and why I'm not here. It kind of puts it into perspective, and it's goal setting for all of us. But the other day, my one daughter was like, I'm going to miss you. And she was crying. I was going away for a full week. And I was like, you know what? At this point, I'm like, good. Glad you missed me. And she's like, what? Right. She stops crying. I was like, yeah, I mean, if you don't love me. Right. Like that huge sign of you loving me. So thank you. Miss me more. She's like, I miss you. You can go. See ya. Bye. Right. So again, I think it's just mindset, it's scheduling what you need to do, it's prioritizing what needs to be done, and sticking to it. Like discipline and listen, I could sit here and motivate everybody in this room. Like you might walk out of here and want to like, I don't know, like build a brick house. Like that's how pumped you are. But if you don't have self-discipline, the motivation is going to wear off. And discipline outweighs motivation every single day of the week.
Right, so two more questions from the virtual audience. The first question I want to know, is your current husband a police officer?
No, I made that mistake the first time. No, I'm just kidding. People usually laugh at that one. No, I love cops. They're fine. No, he actually is a brilliant man. I met him. He was my dispatcher, not at the same, we went to county. So, but he was my dispatcher. He looked 12. I made fun of him. He thought that was me flirting and we started dating and, he actually runs a tactical dispatch unit, which goes out on like major calls. So he was able to organize this thing through his CPM. And so he works for a communication center as a fire and EMS coordinator. And he is the coordinator for a tactical dispatch unit that goes out on calls, search warrants, SWAT, all that stuff.
One more question. How was a relationship with your children and a dynamic with your current husband? Were they afraid that your current husband may have similar traits?
Ooh, I don't know. You would have to probably ask them that, but I don't think so. I know so, right? So my husband and I now, his name is Matt, he's wonderful. He and I just exemplified what we wanted them to have in a relationship when they grew up. So I think that they trusted that. They were also 20 months and 8 months old when I separated from my ex-husband. So they didn't ever see my relationship with him. They've only ever really known this relationship. They love him so much that after my ex-husband killed himself in December of 2022, that on Christmas morning, they asked him to adopt them officially. And so I'm going to start. And so much so that my oldest daughter asked if she could change her name to Glogolich from Riley. And so on June 2nd of 2023, my husband formally adopted my older two, which is hysterical because my husband's 9 years younger than me. So on the birth certificate, it looks like he got me pregnant when he was 16. So that's awesome. It's really good. It's a really good story. Yeah, I wasn't. And listen, 16 is the age of consent in New Jersey, but it's fine.
All right, the last question. Do you have any books to recommend?
Oh my gosh, I have a million. Ready? All right. So there is a book by John O'Leary called On Fire. And it's about ways to really live a fully ignited life. And just the basis of it is when he was young, he saw his brother playing with fire and he did it and he set himself and the whole entire house on fire. And he ended up having only his face that wasn't scarred. And he is still alive today and is an incredible motivational speaker. But what really got me was the choice that he put out there. And that's where I got really my growth mindset. One function of that, one of the 7 ways was choosing growth or choosing stagnation. And I love that. For leadership, I'm very much into Simon Sinek. So know your why or what's your why? Leaders Eat Last is huge. But those are some of my favorite. Those are my 3 top favorite books. Not budgeting for higher ed or finance. Like that was an inside joke.
I have another question. Just how do you, sorry, unless anybody else had other questions, how do you get over, or do you ever get over the anger? Or how do you get through the anger? Everything that's happened to you.
I mean, I'm not angry anymore. Like it just doesn't serve me. I mean, I have this phrase, be the change. And so I just try to be the change that I want to see, the positive changes that I want to see. Anger is a feeling, right? So anybody who thinks that, it's not there, I do get angry sometimes. Like when I see my kids struggle and I know that it's because of the choice I made and who I conceived them with. It can be hard, but I don't really hold on to anger anymore. I was very angry at my ex-husband until he died. Very angry, just continually angry all the time for what he continued. Like I was worried I was going to have to be at a wedding with him. Like there's all those things you worry about, right? When we talk about victims, nobody realizes that I'm triggered as a victim when I would get like a direct deposit just from child support. Like there are these little things that no one tells you about as part of being a victim of a crime. And so again, I was able to pay that forward as a cop, but when he killed himself, like honestly, the only thing that I hold on to anger and it's eating at me. It's like wanting revenge, but drinking the poison you need for somebody else. Don't be nervous.
Hello.
Hi. Go Giants, but it's cool.
I mean,
For those of you that can't see, he's wearing a Raiders hat. It's fine.
well, for the record, he's good.
All right.
But I don't really have a question, but I would like to say, I like what you said about PTSD. It's not a physical.
Injury.
Right. And sorry. I like what you said about, like the whole PCS thing. It's not a disorder, it's an injury. As as a criminal justice student, transition into, I do want to ask this now. As far as like far as like managing, like your past, like just your everyday work. How do you manage, like as far as also like outside of like getting up at 4 and like going to go do just for something like that. Like, what's that one thing that really like, that give you that sense of like, today I got this. I can do this today.
Self-awareness. That's, knowing what my triggers are, knowing that people can act a certain way, but I'm in control of how I react to that. And understanding that all of my actions have to serve a purpose and I want them to be positive ones, not negative ones. And I want to be the example. I just do, I want to be the example for my kids of how they can get through everything. We really have enabled people to feel like they can give up very easily and to not take accountability and look for everybody else for the answers instead of having faith in themselves that they can accomplish what they want on like with people helping them, but just empowering them. So, it really is, you work on your mindset and you have to believe it. You have to really give into it. It has to be a daily practice in order for it. It's really like, I know this is being recorded, but there's people in my family that are super negative all the time. Like I walk in the room and they're like, pop, 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 pop. I'm like, I can't be a part of this. Or cops that I work with that are super negative. I'm like, turn that little frown upside down, buddy. Right. Like, when people ask me how I'm doing, I'm like, I'm great. I woke up on the right side of the dirt today. You know what I mean? Like finding the gratitude in those tiny little things and being very self-aware of what's going to bother me and what might, trigger me is probably how I get through it the most. Okay.
Any other questions we have from the audience, from the students?
I'm sorry, it's a little embarrassing, but I see you have a tattoo verse on your arm.
Mhm.
Do you have a religious or spiritual belief that got you through your experience?
That's a phenomenal question. I very much struggle with my relationship with God. I grew up Irish Catholic, and personally, I never really feel like I fit there. So for me, my religion is very spiritual at the moment, and I work very hard at trying to connect. But when I was going through what I was going through, I questioned my faith a lot because I was like, what did I ever do to deserve this? And how much is too much? And, there's that saying that God only gives you what you can handle. I'm like, I'm pretty done handling this, right? Like I'm good, right? Like I'm the bulldozer right now. Can I be like the feather? And so I do have this, Matthew 5:9 is blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And so I practice my faith. I do have faith. It's not as defined as others, but I do put the work in. And that's actually a really great question because people who go through traumatic incidents often do question things because they don't understand the why behind it. And that's why I like to say that I turned my pain into a purpose. Like I wouldn't have been able to help so many people if I had not gone through what I went through. So when I question it, that's what I kind of come back to. But thank you. That's not an embarrassing question at all. It's a great question.
It's a great question. And anybody else? Anybody in the chat? You're good? Okay. Well, I thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for coming
Yeah.
out here, talking to our students. Round of applause again.
Thank you.